Good morning and welcome to this important and timely policy event titled Power Interruption, Massachusetts Energy Challenges as Federal Policy Shifts. I'm George Donnelly, President of the State House News Service and Master List. A little bit about both. The State House News Service is a round-the-clock source of granular, nonpartisan news and intelligence emanating from Beacon Hill. Master List is a free newsletter that curates the top political and policy news and goes out every morning at 7:15 to 30,000 subscribers. Between the two of those publications, we have a footprint that draws policy-minded subscribers to events on important issues, among them in the last year, the health of Massachusetts hospitals and the Commonwealth's economic competitiveness. Today, we will explore the sea change in national energy policy and what that may mean for Massachusetts. We're honored to have Rebecca Tepper, Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, here to lead off the program. Thank you, Secretary. Then we'll have a panel of leaders in the energy industry to discuss the implications of new policies, many that are anathema to Massachusetts energy goals, and how the Commonwealth can continue to move forward. Our panelists include Randy Bell, Vice President, Government and Regulatory Affairs, JERA Americas, Joe Curtatone, President of the Alliance for Climate Transition, Rebecca Ullman, Director of External Affairs at SouthCoast Wind and Head of Commercial and Stakeholders North America at Ocean Winds. And our moderator is Elizabeth Turnbull Henry, the President of the Environmental League of Massachusetts. We're grateful for our sponsors and partners in pulling this event together, including JERA Americas, the Environmental League of Massachusetts, the Alliance for Climate Transition, and TSK Associates. And now, without further ado, please welcome Rebecca Tepper, Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Welcome to the podium.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces here today. You know, a lot of people here in this room have been pushing Massachusetts forward for years. You know, we didn't get to where we are as leaders in energy and environmental issues without the work of all of you, without the work of lots of legislative changes, lots of advocate campaigns, lots of stakeholder groups, lots of task force and working groups, et cetera. And I do want to say that our office has not been immune from that. Indeed, I think we have taken a great advantage of those kinds of forum. And I just wanted to thank the people who have participated in them. I know that they take time, and I know you have jobs. But I do feel strongly that that kind of collaboration and that kind of discussion does result in the best product. So do want to thank you for that, and want to also thank my team who's here. Many of you know that I say over and over again that we have a superstar energy and environment team, and we really do, and you know that because you've worked with them. So I want to thank them as well. Yeah. So I thought I would talk today a little bit about what makes Massachusetts strong and give you an update on where things are right now and lay out Governor Healy's vision to build new energy and deliver for Massachusetts. So I'll start with stuff that's in our control, which is the easier things and the things that are going really well. First, as you all know, last year we had a great year for the climate legislation. We had solved, I think pretty much solved, debates that have been going on for decades about siting and permitting clean energy, and I'm really excited that that is going to unlock some more homegrown distributed solar and storage and the infrastructure to support it, transmission, distribution, and that means that states and communities will be able to rely on energy themselves and not necessarily having to get as much LNG from Trinidad or much power from dirty power plants. So we're going to produce our energy here, and that investment is going to grow our economy, not somebody else's. So right now, my team is busy doing regulations and guidance for implementing that climate law. And again, I appreciate the effort that people are making to help us shape those documents. They are important. Even if they're procedural documents, it's important that we get them right. They're documents that we're going to be using for a long time, so appreciate your involvement in helping shape those going forward. We hope that we're going to continue our leadership in solar because we know that it makes Massachusetts more secure and more reliable. I don't know if you know this, but I like this stat, so I say it over and over again, that Massachusetts is the second highest amount of distributed solar per capita in the US, only behind Hawaii. On the hottest day of the summer last year, behind-the-meter solar meant 1/5 of our demand. And my grandma would say, that's not nothing. So I think it's really important to recognize the importance of both behind-the-meter and larger solar projects. So this year, as many of you know, we are making changes to our SMART program. That's our solar incentive program. We put out a draft proposal a while ago, and we got a robust set of comments. And we really did go back to the drawing board on it based on the comments that we received. Produced a new document that I think people are excited about and is a compromise that I think is one that's going to work. That new solar program, or the expanded solar program, is going to really focus on community solar, low-income customers, and protecting our natural lands. So at the same time, I'm really happy to report that we will be doing a storage procurement in July. And we're going to be launching that first ever storage procurement. It's going to be 1,500 megawatts for storage. Excuse me. And our Clean Peak and our Connected Solutions program have been doing a good job of successfully enabling behind-the-meter storage. And this design of this particular procurement is sort of to bring us to the next generation of projects. And we're going to be looking for 4 to 10 hours of duration in this particular RFP. So I think it's going to be helpful to accelerate this really important piece of the energy puzzle here in Massachusetts, and we're really grateful. I saw several legislators who are here today, very grateful for your cooperation on this and giving us this new authority to be able to launch this RFP. So if last year was our collective opportunity to work on siting, clean energy siting, this year is, I believe, our collective opportunity to tackle interconnection. The time and expense to interconnect onto the grid is holding us back and continues to hold us back. We have an internal task force charged with making meaningful progress on interconnection this year. We want to see more efficient interconnection process, more proactive build-out of the grid, and more options for financing interconnection upgrades. We need all of you and our utilities to work with us in a collaborative manner, and we need to move quickly. This is something that needs immediate attention in order to help us build Massachusetts' economic development and our clean energy. So many of you have heard me speak, and I never miss the opportunity to talk about demand reduction and my excitement about virtual power plants. So I do want to remind everyone that we do need to stay on the path of reducing demand, and it's more important than ever to really focus on our peak demand. Last week, we were once again ranked, our state was ranked one of the best states for energy efficiency. Thanks to our long-standing work to lower demand, We have reduced our energy consumption while our economy has grown. As you all probably say, many have said, and I say, you know, the cheapest energy is the energy that we don't use. And being efficient with our existing infrastructure and transmission means major savings for our customers. So as we continue to electrify our cars and buildings, we need to double down on programs that incentivize off-peak usage and energy-efficient buildings. That means rate options that reduce the cost of charging, paying customers to cut back on their power during high demand, and making it possible for customers to join together to sell their demand to the grid. So there are some things that are out of our control, and that right now is our new federal government. As you know, we're still in negotiations regarding the offshore wind contract, so I can't speak specifically to those projects. But I do want to stop for a minute to talk about the federal administration's opposition to offshore wind. I think we need to be clear about what the rest of the world is doing about offshore wind. The rest of the world is building offshore wind because they know that it brings energy affordability, it brings energy security, and it brings energy independence. And right now in Europe, I've looked up these stats because I think it's really important to understand how much this industry is growing in other places. So in Europe, they have 34 gigawatts right now online. That's the equivalent of 42 vineyard winds. But the China one is what will really get you. The China stats are, in China, for both onshore and offshore, they've built the equivalent of 551 vineyard winds. That's 444 gigawatts of wind. In Shanghai alone, they just got permission to build another 30 gigawatts of offshore wind. Clearly, there's something important going on here, and this industry is delivering affordable power for people across the world. I don't think that any of us dispute we need to be energy independent, and that's vital, but we should not take domestic energy sources off the table. America needs to be competing. We need to fight for the factories, the high-paying jobs, and the economic development that these projects bring. It is critical that states like Massachusetts chart a serious and steady path towards clean energy independence. The gutting of federal agencies and costly tariffs are creating a lot of uncertainty and instability in the economy. Offshore wind is not immune. But I am confident, and I remain confident, that there will be an offshore wind industry off the coast of Massachusetts. The fundamentals are there. They have not changed. We still have some of the best wind, we still have shallow water, and we still have a trained workforce. We're going to be investing in our ports, we're going to be continuing to invest in our workforce and our infrastructure. We're going to move forward. So, the Trump administration policies are creating an energy affordability crisis. It doesn't matter if it's clean energy or natural gas or any energy. He's making the price go up, way up. And Governor Healy has been clear that affordability is central to the vision of energy in Massachusetts. Her priority since day one has been to lower the cost of living and doing business in our state. And that's why Massachusetts is using a full range of energy sources. A diverse energy supply lowers cost, reduces price spikes, and creates jobs in growing industries. We are laser focused right now on customer bills, and that's because Massachusetts families have demanded that we do so. We have already seen, as you have already seen, we have come out with an energy affordability agenda. Energy costs are too high, and the price spikes on businesses and families are unacceptable. So Governor Healy pushed, as she can do, and we got a 10% cut for gas bills in March and April, and we expect residents won't have to pay that back later. Our affordability agenda will lower bills by $6 billion over the next 5 years, including $220 million now. We're giving everybody a $50 rebate on their electric bills. We're creating the nation's first discounted rate for middle-income families, and we're taking unnecessary costs off the bill. So while Donald Trump raises energy costs through tariffs and limiting states' abilities to build new clean energy, now is a time that we need to get to work and dig in. We're not without options. To start, we have excellent relationships with our Northeast states. We are working very collaboratively together in several different fora, and we're actively discussing with our neighbors about bringing on new resources in a number of fronts. This is particularly true in the area of transmission. In a matter of days, we expect that ISO New England is going to issue an RFP for the first ever competitive procurement for transmission. And this is wonky, but it's extremely important and innovative. It means that we're going to be able to, as a region, open up the possibility of additional onshore wind from Maine that's there, ready to go, but stuck. We're going to open that up for it to flow into the grid. And FERC has already signed off on this process, and it's the first time that the states have driven a procurement like this. So now we're also looking at other opportunities with our partner states. In the recent climate law, the legislature granted us the ability to join a multi-state procurement for clean energy, and we're considering with our colleagues right now sort of the best way to use that authority. And beyond our relationship here with the Northeast, we also continue to have relationship with our Canadian counterparts, which can remain strong. I think I saw our Canadian friends here today, so thank you for coming. So there are untapped resources both in Quebec and in Atlantic Canada, and we last year hosted our Canadian neighbors in Boston, and we continue to meet with them, including about transmission and offshore and onshore wind. There is a long-standing and special relationship there, and that will remain. So we hit the ground running in 2023, and we have not stopped. I can tell you it's been quite an opportunity for me and for my colleagues at EEA. We are a really committed bunch to working on your behalf. In the coming weeks, Governor Healy will be filing an energy affordability and independence bill. And we're putting sort of the final touches on that now. And through that bill, we're going to continue our work to build energy that delivers for our residents. Last year we all came together on the LEADS Act, and we came together on the climate bill on siting and permitting reform. And that is going to continue to be our playbook. People coming together, having hard conversations, negotiating, and coming to innovative solutions. We know that we can do this today, and it's all the more important that we do so. There is no denying that we have a rough couple of years in front of us. But amidst the uncertainty, I do draw confidence from Massachusetts' history of energy and climate leadership. Our job as a community that works together is to stay focused on what we can control and not let the distractions get in our way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Tepper. Now it's time for our panel. Would the panelists please make their way to the stage? As I mentioned, we have Randy Bell, who's the Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs at JERA Americas. Joe Curtatone is the President of the Alliance for Climate Transition. Rebecca Ullman, Director of External Affairs at SouthCoast Wind and Head of Commercial and Stakeholders, North America at Ocean Winds. And our moderator, as you guys, that works. Elizabeth Turnbull Henry, the President of the Environmental League of Massachusetts. Just moving this over here. Elizabeth, take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. We got a good show for you today. I want to thank Secretary Tepper. I know she's got to go, but We are really blessed to have leadership and grit and resolve from the Haley Driscoll administration, and that's certainly embodied in the secretary. So thank you for being here. And big thanks to all the staff at EEA and across the government that are continuing to make progress these days. I also want to thank George and the staff of State House News Service. Those of us that have done this kind of work in other states recognize what a treasure State House News is for timely, detailed, actionable reporting. We are so lucky. We're also lucky to have some members of the Massachusetts legislature here today. I noticed Senator Barrett, Reps. Moschino, Owens, Vitolo, and Davis, and also the chair of our Department of Public Utilities, Jamie Van Nostrand. Are there other elected or appointed officials here with us? Well, thank you so much for being here. So we've had a chance to connect, the four of us, and we're reflecting on not only where our heads are in this moment, but also where yours are, the kinds of curiosities and concerns, anxieties that brought you here for coffee and pastries to start the day. And our goals are to help contextualize, sort of from where we sit, what the current federal administration is doing and what it means for Massachusetts. To help us all reconnect with a vision for Massachusetts leadership right now. Massachusetts has been a place of extraordinary leadership for centuries. We're celebrating a big milestone here in April. And so to reconnect with that vision of state leadership. And then finally, to explore specific policies and recommendations that can help point us forward. So what I hope to provide today is context, vision, and specifics. And we're going to move quickly. We've got some longer form questions and some lightning round questions, which I love. Our plan is going to be to speak for about 45 minutes as the four of us, and then to pivot to about 15 minutes of questions and answers from the audience. So please be thinking about what you would like to ask, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So I'm gonna just forego lengthy introductions for folks, but I would like to ask you each to weave in some of the key context for your organizations in this first question. So we're gonna address the elephant in the room first, which is the Trump administration. It has already created a range of fairly significant hurdles for the New England grid. We're seeing executive orders to slow offshore wind and EVs, federal grant freezes, tariffs jacking not just energy costs, but also construction costs, judicial appointees siding with polluters amid broader concerns about the power of courts, EPA, DOE, and other agencies reversing regulations and having their budgets and staff slashed. And all this is happening in this sort of toxic dust cloud of mis and disinformation that's being perpetuated from the top. So each of these things would, in its own right, represent a massive challenge for the state. And taken together, I know I sometimes feel that the combination is fairly overwhelming. So I'm curious from where you sit, and Becky, I'm going to start with you because offshore wind is subject to a fairly uniquely vitriolic confluence of challenges right now. What are the biggest threats, and how are you advising the state respond? Take it away.
Great. Wonderful to be here. This is an incredible room. I see lots of friends, so thanks for coming out this morning. I am just recalling I was on the stage about a year ago in a similar event, and I got the Trump question, which, by the way, was not part of the prep. And everyone groaned when it was asked, and we had to figure out the response. And man, what a year it has been. So here we are. Just a little bit of background. I am representing Ocean Winds, which is an international global offshore wind developer. We have 18.8 gigawatts in development of offshore wind across the globe. I really appreciated Secretary Tepper's focus on the global context because that is so important to remember in this moment. But I am part of a team. My team is part of a global team. We are doing offshore wind. We are building projects. We are putting turbines in the water. It is working all over the place, and that's something that we remember every day. So in North America, Ocean Winds is developing 7 gigawatts of projects across the country. We've got SouthCoast Wind in the Northeast, 23 miles off the coast of Nantucket, and I'll spend most of my time talking about that project. We also have Blue Point Winds in the New York Bight, and then Golden State Wind out in California. We have recently had a renewed focus on, what is our economic impact in the U.S.? What is SouthCoast Wind and Ocean Winds in general? What do we do for Massachusetts? What do we do for New England? What do we do for the U.S.? So I have some numbers that I'd like to run through because they are pretty powerful. But to date, SouthCoast Wind has spent over $670 million in the U.S. alone. We are projected to spend approximately $6 billion in the U.S. for just our first project. So the lease is divided into 2 projects. Project 1 will spend approximately $6 billion in the U.S. If you extrapolate that over the rest of the portfolio, we get into upwards of $40 billion once these projects are fully built out. That's a lot. Also want to just mention our job numbers, which are really strong. So again, just for SouthCoast Project 1, we're looking at about 15,000 jobs, the majority of which will be union jobs. So economic impact has a renewed focus, and I'm really proud to report those numbers. So Elizabeth, question, which is our, what are we most afraid of? What are we most worried about? It's hard, it's like picking a least favorite child, I guess. But I think, we can talk about the executive orders. I feel like that is pretty well-trod territory. We could talk about tax credits, we could talk about tariffs. There's a lot going on out there. I think for me in particular, both for what I do as a job, but also being an American and hoping that the U.S. continues to have a very strong economy, the thing that gives me the most anxiety, I will say, is the news about the Atlantic Shore's clean air permit. And I think for anyone who cares about investment in the U.S. and about building things in the U.S., that should be very, very concerning. And I think we need to be fair and say it is not the first time that a renewable energy project or an energy project in general, its permits have become politicized, but we should all be very concerned about what's going to happen on that front. It really is, in my opinion, a rule of law question and whether we can count on having a regulatory environment that enables investment in construction. So that's the thing that gives me the most concern. I think the second part of the question is sort of what the states can do. And for a lot of these questions, I'm going to talk about Massachusetts, but I'm also going to talk about Rhode Island because SouthCoast Wind is currently negotiating PPAs with both Massachusetts and Rhode Island, so we are a dual state project. And as the Secretary said, we're in negotiations, they're confidential, and so won't get into that. But I would say, and this may be a little bit general, but really sticking with us, staying at the table through this process is the most important thing that the states can do. We are, again, in unprecedented times, there's no playbook for this. There's no playbook for the sort of targeted harm that we're seeing through the executive orders or the sort of general harm that comes through uncertainty and tariffs. And we could not ask for better state partners in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And we're so grateful for their willingness to stick it out because I think leaders with less dedication to renewable energy, it would be very easy to throw in the towel and say, see you in 4 years. But we are fighting for this project, and I'm so pleased to say that we have partners who are right there with us.
That's great. I'm going to turn it to you, Joe.
Great, thanks. Good morning. I'm Joe Curtatone. I'm the president of the Alliance for Climate Transition, a nonprofit trade organization in the Northeast, New England, New York State, leading the just, equitable, and rapid transition to a clean energy future and a diverse climate economy. I cut my teeth for 2 decades as mayor of Somerville. I keep forgetting to do this, though. For George Donnelly, the last time, he always invites me back. I have to thank him because 30 years ago, he was smart enough to endorse me the first time I ran for office. George, for all those naysayers, you chose wisely. I well appreciate it. We are in a critical moment. I think we all know, but it's heartening and energizing to see you here, and I gave similar remarks to that point last night at our accelerated kickoff for Clean Tech Open Northeast at Greentown Labs, because now's not the time to stick your tail between your legs and keep your head down. Now's the time to remember what we stand for and to align and fight back and stand for those values. And we will overcome and we will win. But it is a critical moment because the clean energy transition, as we know, is under threat. And not because the technology doesn't work and not because the economics don't add up, but because the political climate has shifted sharply. And the Trump administration, it's only been a couple of months, has already led to, we talked about it, executive orders slowing offshore and EV infrastructure, federal grant freezes and regulatory rollbacks. You mentioned a concerted legal effort to align with polluters over public health, tariffs that threaten to inflate construction and energy costs. And any one of these, as has been emphasized, on its own is very challenging, but taken together, they are, and I want to emphasize, by design. They are designed to destabilize clean energy progress and undermine confidence in the sector. But we're here in the Commonwealth. And here in Massachusetts, as we know, we have a choice. We can either retreat or we can lead. The Commonwealth has decided to lead and act. We want to lead. We bring together entrepreneurs and municipal leaders and advocates and investors to push forward the policies and the partnerships to scale clean energy equitably and quickly. And that means helping our cities take action, advocating for smart legislation and supporting innovation ecosystems that make clean technology accessible, affordable, and reliable. But there is a threat we must name clearly, and that's the rise of misinformation and disinformation, especially targeting clean energy projects. You know that very well. But also on energy efficiency funds that can permanently lower energy burdens. At ACT, what we're doing, we're actively tracking and responding to coordinated misinformation campaigns that seek to erode public trust in solar and wind and transmission and electrification efforts and storage. And these campaigns are increasingly targeted and sophisticated, using social and local influencers, social media, misleading data to sow doubt and division in communities across Massachusetts. We're seeing it right now in places like Everett. We saw it on the Cape, and it continues. And this is by design. And this matters because misinformation doesn't just delay projects. It divides communities, as we can imagine, stalls progress, and raises costs for everyone. And if a project takes 5 extra years to get permitted because of false claims about public health impacts or reliability, I mean, that delay isn't cost neutral, right? It's an economic, environmental, and social setback. And at ACT, we're trying to respond to this in several ways. We're creating fact-based resources for communities, municipal leaders, and social media outlets and other media outlets. We're partnering with researchers to identify where these campaigns originate and how they spread and who finances them, because we can never let the lie become the truth. We must not let lies drive our energy policy, which is happening. The truth is, and we know it, and you need to leave here and remind people every day and tell stories, clean energy is safe, it's reliable, it's cost-effective, and job-creating. Our challenge, our collective challenge, is to ensure people hear it, they believe it, and before fear takes over. So.
All right, Randy.
Thank you all so much for being here. I apologize. I'm sure you all noticed I am not John O'Brien. Thank you for not getting up and leaving when you heard my name announced. John couldn't be here today, unfortunately. I had an urgent issue he needed to deal with at the last minute. So I'm taking his place. Again, I'm Randy Bell. I'm the Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs at JERA Americas. JERA is a really interesting company. I've been with the company for about 10 months. And before I joined, I was getting recruited by John. And I said, John, this is the most interesting company I've never heard of. And why hadn't I heard of it? So JERA is the largest power producer in Japan. We provide about a third of the power for Japan. We have a huge set of responsibilities to ensure that Japan's energy system remains stable and affordable and moves towards a more sustainable future. Japan has a net zero by 2050 goal, and so does JERA. And the current politics in the United States aren't changing that net zero goal. And so we are really laser focused on meeting that goal while also providing reliability, energy security, and I think really important in this context, affordability. So JERA is, big in Japan, but we also operate in 20 plus countries. We have a large renewables arm based out of London, and there's a big announcement last December where we partnered with BP on an offshore wind program. And so we're now, don't quote me on this, but I believe the 5th largest offshore wind developer in the world. So we're developing offshore wind, not really right now in the United States for clear reasons, but everywhere else. We're doing offshore wind in Japan, we're doing offshore wind in Southeast Asia, offshore wind in Europe, and we're committed to continuing to do that. And let's hope that in this interregnum here in the US, that we are able to bring down the cost curve so that when we're able to develop these projects here in the US, the costs have come down. Because I know that was a concern for offshore wind even before Trump came into office. But then here in Massachusetts, we own 3 thermal power plants. We also own 1 up in Maine. We have 14 power assets that we own in whole or part in the United States. 1 onshore wind farm down in the south of Texas, 2 solar, and then the rest are thermal. And in line with our global vision, we purchase electricity assets where we see they play an important role in maintaining reliability, particularly in a moment where we see electricity demand going up, but also where we see a pathway to decarbonization. And so we're doing this all over the world. So in Japan, we took one of our thermal assets and last summer tested a 20% substitution of ammonia. And so we actually found that we could co-fire ammonia. That means that it's a 0 CO2 emissions fuel, and the NOx and SOx were below the previous threshold that we were measuring. So we have great outcome there, and we're now actively working to procure clean ammonia for those types of power plants. In the US, we own a power plant in New Jersey called Linden Cogen, which provides about 10% of the power to New York City. And then it also provides power for the largest refinery on the East Coast. So really important for the economy across the Northeast. And we found that there was at the refinery, there was an off gas that was getting flared that had hydrogen in it. And so we have taken that off gas that includes hydrogen and are now co-firing the hydrogen in a turbine every single day. And so that turbine, we've modified it so it can co-fire up to 40% hydrogen, and it's doing that on a daily basis. So again, we are proving out that we can do this kind of modification with existing technology, existing resources, to move in the right direction on the energy transition. So now to Massachusetts. We own 3 plants here. The one that we're going to talk about mostly today is the Canal Power Plant, though we also own Milford and Dighton. We purchased those later, and so we're not as far along in our journey there. But at Canal, that's a very, very old power plant. The first unit was built in the 60s. The second unit was built in the 70s. So these are very old. And then the third unit was built more recently. These are very old, and they very rarely get used. They are crucial, though, for reliability on the coldest and hottest days. We don't want to see those go away quite yet, because we need them when it gets really cold, when it gets really hot. However, we see an opportunity there, and this is where Massachusetts can really come in and show leadership. We see an opportunity to reuse that infrastructure to accelerate and lower the cost of clean energy. And so we have been talking for the past couple of years about using surplus interconnection service at Canal. Surplus interconnection service, I'll get into more details on that, but it's a kind of interconnection sharing, and it's cheaper and faster than a traditional interconnection process. And using that for interconnecting offshore wind, if and when that happens, or in the shorter term, possibly a battery solution. And so there are a number of ways in which the state of Massachusetts can lean in to its energy and climate agenda and really accelerate surplus interconnection service in the state. And this is something that's being done outside of Massachusetts, in the Midwest, California. Not only one project here in Massachusetts. We can get into more details on this, but really important and a really easy win for accelerating clean energy.
So I'm gonna ask you actually to go kind of right into the details on this, because I think interconnection is one of those things that is rate limiting the deployment of clean energy across New England. Anyone that is tracking this this is one of the biggest headaches we face. We got siting and permitting reform underway. Interconnection is next. You heard the Secretary say that. I would love to ask each of you for really high-level and brief specifics about how you are advising policymakers on interconnection, what your top 2 or 3 recommendations are, what you'd love to see by the end of this year on interconnection reform. I think reimagining the canal is a kind of a cool case study for what we could make possible. So why don't you talk a little bit about what surplus interconnection is?
Yeah, thank you. So surplus interconnection service is a type of interconnection approved by FERC that essentially allows you to share an interconnection with a resource. If you have a resource like canal that is very rarely being used, so it has a 1,200 megawatt interconnection, and so, but it's used 1-2% of the year, and so you have all of this infrastructure that's not being used. SIS allows you to put another resource essentially behind that and share that interconnection. So this is something that can be done today in Massachusetts, in New England. It's allowed by ISO New England. It's allowed by FERC. There is one project already in Massachusetts that is using surplus interconnection service, and then a number of developers are exploring it. The issue that we've had is that for reasons that are kind of technical and historical, SIS has effectively not been allowed in the offshore wind RFPs to date. And so we've been discussing with DOER and the legislature how to make these changes, and it's really a technical fix that would allow the full utilization of a resource like canal, so that we could use the next offshore wind procurement could use canal as its point of interconnection. Or we see, as Secretary Tepper mentioned, this forthcoming storage RFP. What we hope is that surplus interconnection service is allowed in the RFP documents as an interconnection option. And so that's really what we're focused on.
And I know many of the environmental advocates in the room are wondering, like, is this just something that props up fossil fuel power plants forever and ever, or is this a way to help make sure that we can leverage the interconnect but not necessarily subsidize fossil assets in perpetuity?
Yeah. So I think, we're in a moment where electricity demand is growing. And I think that is a really important context, because we were shutting down fossil assets for years, and electricity demand was effectively flat. It's not growing as fast in New England as it is elsewhere, but we are projecting a little less than 2% electricity demand growth per year. And so it's harder at this time to shut down existing assets, particularly until we can get new resources on the grid. And so for the time being, an asset like canal, we get this message all the time, is required for maintaining reliability on those very few days of the year where it's needed. However, using SIS, we think on those days, we can actually bring down the amount that canal is running, and so the emissions from the plant. So if you have offshore wind behind that, canal is called up a few days a year, often in the winter when the wind is really strong. You don't actually, when canal is called up, you wouldn't actually need to turn on the oil units if the wind is blowing, and so it will actually reduce the amount of time that plant is running. Same goes for batteries. If you have a clean resource there, so that when canal is needed, you actually reduce the time that the fossil unit is being run, therefore continuing to provide reliability. It's still there if the wind isn't blowing. It's still there if we've had a bunch of days where you can't charge the battery or whatnot. But you're lowering the usage rate of that unit for the time, however long that is, that it's still needed for reliability.
That's great. And the zero marginal cost resources
Zero marginal
would come
cost
first.
resources go first,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right, Joe, a lot of your members are solar and storage developers in particular. What are you hearing from them, and how are you prioritizing recommendations for interconnection reform?
Yeah, so first, a big shout out, thank you, to the Haley Driscoll administration and the state legislature. Big shout out to my friend Senator Barrett and others for the leadership. Massachusetts just put a big bet, an investment on the climate economy, $1 billion over the next 10 years, doubling down on the ecosystem we have right here in the Commonwealth for the development, research, innovation of new climate technologies. That development, bringing them to market's a point, but we have to get them deployed. And to do that, we need a grid, as has been mentioned, we know that can keep up. So, you know, that's why interconnection reform, has been mentioned, is so important in 2025. It is essential. So our top recommendations, as we hear from members, and I think there's a lot of alignment, is to, one, reduce barriers to permit, install rooftop solar and home batteries, mandate predictable timelines with firm accountability for delays, and prioritize interconnection of projects that serve environmental justice communities, because if we don't fix the interconnection piece, we feel both on the affordability and on the deployment side. It's pretty straightforward.
Becky?
Yeah, we're all here for the year of interconnection. So excited to celebrate all year long. Yeah, I echo a lot of comments that have already been said. I think creating the grid of the future by rationalizing planning processes, intentionally rationalizing planning processes, and making the grid more efficient is going to be the key to both getting assets online, but also lowering costs. I think two specific things that we would point to, we are very much in support of state-identified interconnection points, as they've done in New Jersey through the state agreement approach. While that may not have taken off as we had hoped, we were part of the planning process through our other projects, and I think it is the way interconnection for offshore wind should happen in the future. And the second is we're hoping that the state continues to take an active role in ensuring that transmission expansion is targeted to mitigate curtailment, especially for assets that are procured through state solicitations.
Lightning round, ding! You just stepped into the elevator at the State House, and the governor walks in. You know that she and her team are writing their energy affordability bill right now. You have 3 floors, 1 floor for each of your top 3 recommendations. You know she's going to be getting out at the 3rd floor. What are the 3 things that you would like her to know? Joe.
I'd say, Governor, Somerville needs more money, if I was still mayor, I'd say that. If we streamline interconnection for solar and storage at all sizes and scales, we'll cut bills, we'll grow jobs, and we'll reduce emissions all at once. So let's make it happen. These projects are ready to go. That's the first thing. That's the thing I'd say over and over again to her.
Interconnection, interconnection, interconnection. She leaves. Awesome. Becky.
Okay, I would say offshore wind's entry into the affordability agenda is mostly focused on reducing volatility. Volatility we all know how offshore wind lowers prices. We're coming out of a really cold winter, coldest in 10 years, $4 billion from ratepayers, which is in comparison to 1.6 last year. Let's keep going. I would also say let's keep those targets in legislation. They are the ultimate market signal for the industry, something that sort of future-proofs. We're going to lose Maura Healey as our governor over the next, how many years do we have left? 5 or 6. So we need to make sure that we're good to go for the rest. What floor am I on? So I would just say
the elevator's jammed. Keep going.
And then the sort of the second prong for offshore wind is how do we reduce those PPA prices? And that's something we think about all day, every day. And I think there's a lot of things we don't control, as Secretary Tepper said. I don't have a lot of impact on U.S. interest rates, but we can work together to figure out how we lower prices by lowering risk in the way that we procure. So specifically mitigating exposure to the wholesale market, finding an indexation mechanism that, we have one, which is a huge step, but let's continue to make it better. Ding.
Awesome.
So I'll say back to the SIS theme. The request would be to formally allow SIS for 83C and 83E, so the offshore wind and battery procurements. Putting that into law will make the change, will force the changes in the RFP documents. It's actually not disallowed by the law right now, but we hope that it is encouraged by, or at least allowed by the law. And we have some language for that. But then the number two thing I'd say is continuing to double down on the innovation ecosystem you have here in Massachusetts. JERA spends a lot of time in Massachusetts learning from the startup community that is here. We have a large fleet of power plants and a lot of power we need to decarbonize, and some of that is going to have to come from technologies that don't yet exist. And so Massachusetts is the place where JERA likes to spend time, so continuing to focus on that is going to be a competitive win for the state and for the United States.
Awesome. I love that. It's sort of a nice segue to the next thing that was on my mind, which is about climate tech. Many in this room were really involved in helping create the momentum to pass the climate tech portion of the Mass Leads Act, which establishes that billion-dollar vision for building our climate tech sector over the next 10 years. I'm conscious that the legislature, as we speak, is working on their budgets, and the governor has put forward a proposal for Mass CEC to be fully funded at $30 million. This is a very challenging budget year, and so maybe briefly, if each of you could just share what you hope that our operating budget writers and capital planners are keeping in mind as they put pen to paper.
I'll jump in, and thank you for ELM and everyone who was part of an incredible grassroots effort to work with the administration and the legislature to pass the Mass Leads Act and the climate bill. We support robust funding for Mass CEC. It is a catalyst institution here regionally, on par with NYSERDA, and dollar for dollar, I think, punches well above that belt. It really does, and it's having incredible economic output. We need to continue to tell that story of the role of Mass CEC. So supporting financially both more in operating and capital budgets is important. Climate tech startups can't wait 2 budget cycles to get support. I mean, they're building the tools we need to reach net zero. Right now, we've actually developed more than 60%, enough technologies to reduce greenhouse gases by more than 60% over the next decade if we get them out and deployed into market. And we're particularly well positioned to lead, again, in battery storage and building decarbonization, grid software and analytics, and climate resilient infrastructure. And more. The ecosystem here is unique. We're headquartered at our Greentown Labs. I was excited as mayor, and I want to thank my colleague in the City Council in Somerville for supporting them financially, Ullman. That is the epicenter, the largest climate tech incubator in North America, perhaps the world. The epicenter of the global climate economy, the entry point right here in the Commonwealth. And that and the engine and much more, and we need to continue to double down on that. Mass CEC is that catalyst thread that is critical in that. So continuing investment that is going to be huge to realize all the other investments we made and have the economic output and impact that is achievable.
I would focus on the folks writing the operating budget, and I would say please don't forget about that DOER procurement team. That is a very small group of extremely talented women and men who are literally writing the future of Massachusetts' energy landscape, and they need all the resources they can get.
You got an applause. So, ding, we're back in the elevator, and House Ways and Means Chair Aaron Michaelwitz has just walked in, and you're going back down. We've talked about Mass CEC and DOER, 2 really deserving line items. I'm curious to hear if there's a department or program in state government that you think, particularly given the current federal landscape, that you think is particularly deserving of support in this critical budget year. Why don't I start with you, Joe?
I'd say DPU, right? You mentioned that. I mean, for reform to move quickly, as has been mentioned, to add on to that, they have to be equipped to act. So the Healy and Driscoll administration and Secretary Tepper, there's a lot of credit, had to rebuild those agencies. And they're doing an admirable job. With support of the legislature, we need to continue to do that. The infrastructure within the Commonwealth's government and its institutions has to be there for reform to move quickly and for cases to be administered. So that'll be my primary focus.
Great answer.
Yep.
Department of Renewable and Alternative Energy Development, crucial for continuing to deploy solar and other clean tech here in Massachusetts.
All right. And
DOER procurement team.
all right, all right. So what are I think the other themes we're going to be seeing unfolding this legislative session is policies specifically to support municipalities in their progress towards climate goals. We have enacted significant climate laws in the last 3 sessions, which is really commendable, and cities and towns are where a lot of the action is now. I want to start with you, Joe, but also open it up to Randy and Becky if you have things to add. From where you sit, what do you think municipal leaders need from our state to make progress at the pace and scale required to be net zero by 2050? And what are the top, maybe 1 or 2, most impactful things the legislature can do right now to drive municipal progress? There's sort of a coda here, which is we've had a lot of carrots, right? Our eyesight's really good in Massachusetts. We've got a lot of carrots. And in terms of incentives and adders and grants and things like that, is it time for some sticks? Joe?
Yeah, in short, yes. So first, let me say, the majority of the Commonwealth, its municipalities, 365 cities and towns, and the majority of the country are made up of municipalities no bigger than Somerville, Massachusetts. And I've been on national calls as a former member of the board of directors of National League of Cities and coalitions. We're talking about Race to Zero and Paris Accords. We're all on board, aligned on value and mission, and we look at each other and say, what the hell do we do next? Because the leadership is there. The majority of these municipalities don't have, we just talked about the important funding for DOER and DP, don't have the organizational or structure within their municipal governments to move it forward beyond that. But the leadership is there, so I think we need to give them the tools. And a couple of steps the legislature can consider perhaps this session is, 1, expand that technical assistance and funding for municipal climate planning and implementation, and allow perhaps local governments to own and operate distributed energy without, state-level barriers. But as you mentioned, we've offered carrots for a long time, and it might be time for clear accountability frameworks too. So if net zero is a mandate, municipalities need both that support and structure to deliver. But the good news, and my impression has always been, there's leadership there, and not just at the executive level, but at the town meeting, legislative body level. But just mandating alone won't be enough. Let's give them the tools that support them to build that capacity to execute. Because, it's a little long-winded, the movement for the clean energy transition has always started at the local, municipal, and regional level on a global stage. And that's why what we do locally and at the state level, especially in this political climate, is even more important.
Well, we, in Sandwich, we have a great relationship. And so the town has always been very supportive of what we're doing. But we've been doing this program up at our Bucksport facility in Bucksport, Maine. It's called the MESERT program. And I think it's a really interesting model for how communities that have aging energy infrastructure can work with the companies that own them to think about how to use that infrastructure for the future. So it's called the Maine Community Energy Redevelopment Program, MESERP. And what the state of Maine has hired a consultant for 5 towns that have sort of aging energy infrastructure, one of which is our Bucksport facility, generation facility up in Maine, to actually look at what opportunities there are for redeveloping or reusing that infrastructure. And we're expecting the final report, I think this week. If not this week, then next week. But it really got the town to start thinking about what they want, what they can do, and what's possible given the infrastructure they have, given the community they have, et cetera. And so it really got the town to take, I think, the next step in sort of being proactive for themselves in terms of how do they shape their energy and economic future. So I think we love participating in that program, and I think it's a great model for other states, Massachusetts, other states in the region. So
It's great. It reminds me a little bit of the energy transformation
Yep.
processes that are
Yep, exactly.
underway here. Anything to add on municipalities?
One quick thing, that DOER procurement team is leading a process to think about how we enable municipalities to step into PPA contracts. And it is not straightforward, and it's mostly because, you know, developers are complicated, financing is very complicated, and figuring out how we bring smaller municipalities into that, into the syndicates and clubs and things. It is difficult, but I think it's worth it because if we think about ownership of these projects, we all own these projects, but if your municipality is getting power directly, you're paying for that, all of a sudden it's a new level of ownership. And I think that is going to really help the offshore wind industry as it moves forward.
That's great. Joe, a question for you about solar and storage with offshore wind facing the headwinds, pun intended, that it's facing. A lot of us are looking more to solar and storage in the near term to be dialing up deployment. Can you speak specifically to how ACT is advocating to accelerate solar and storage deployment in the Commonwealth?
One, again, we're advocating to continue to reduce those barriers to permit and install safe, even residential rooftop solar and storage. I will say the misinformation piece, I'm going to speak specifically to battery storage, is one of greatest concern, as it is in general. We saw this with transmission lines on the Cape when there was a targeted effort to say that transmission lines from offshore wind coming from the beaches of the Cape are going to harm public health, even though they're encased in cement 30 feet on the ground. You had a better chance of harming your public health if something above your head fell on top of you. But these are the types of targeted campaigns, and right now it's around storage that it's not safe. The batteries are going to explode. We cannot meet our climate action goals without storage. It is impossible. We just had this conversation about this with the Secretary. We need to get more megawatts. More megawatts is an important and strategic component of our climate action plan and to unlock the clean energy transition. So right now, in addition to the legislative, working on the legislative side in the region to promote those policies and regulatory reforms to allow for more of that and reduce barriers, the biggest threat and the biggest work we're doing right now is on education, and we need to ramp that up.
All right. I've got two more questions, and then we'll turn to audience Q&A, so be thinking about what's on your minds. The first is a question about silver linings. As unlikely as it may seem, unexpected progress can often be found in moments of real tumult and uncertainty. And I'd love to hear from each of you about a specific spot where you're seeing hope or potential. From the darkest corner, Becky.
Come on. Okay, my silver lining is that it has been, I don't want to say easy, but always logical when we are making the case for offshore wind to point to climate change. It just is the reason for so many, for the industry, I believe in it. It was the answer, right? It is no longer the answer for a lot of the folks who are running various parts of government. And so as a team, and I'm looking at my folks, we've all been in this effort, we've had to figure out how we defend this industry without using the word climate change. How do we justify the existence of offshore wind if you don't believe in climate change? And that has been both a challenge, but it has been really rewarding because the answer is we still need it. We still need it for energy independence. We still need it for energy reliability. We still need it if we want to grow the load. So I think that's my silver lining, is that we're going to come out of this having articulated our value proposition outside of climate change so much more clearly than we did going into this. I started with all of my numbers. Those are not numbers that I had in October of 2024 because it just didn't feel like it was necessary. But now I have them, and I can defend our economic investment and the good that we'll do both in New England and this country. And I have the current political climate to thank.
Well said. Joe.
Yeah, there are silver linings. First, it's symbolic here. I mean, there's unprecedented collaboration, people coming together, because the undercurrent momentum of the clean energy transition cannot be stopped, cannot be thwarted. Some industries are going to have to reset and recalibrate. But we have found, in examining the misinformation tactics of the nefarious forces, when we have a very practical, human-level message of the positive impacts to people, place, and planet, how your life is going to improve, the economic impacts, which, if you hope you follow politics, and if you're a Democrat, you should be really pissed off, not just the election result, but the fact that this message, the intersectionality of our climate action goals, what the Biden administration under the IRA and other states have done, and the amount of jobs, manufacturing that's been relocated or running, exploding in this country in a positive way, and the economic output, that moves people. So really we're finding most people, and that's why the nefarious forces haven't focused as much on attacking whether or not the climate crisis is real, but attacking the efficacy of climate technology. A simple human-level message on those positive impacts move people. That is a silver lining we must grasp. So when you leave here today, remember that and tell stories.
I think the possible silver lining is permitting reform. It's bipartisan in Washington. Clean energy developers need it. The Biden Department of Energy was very frustrated by the slow pace of permitting just to get the projects that they wanted done to get done. And so I think that there seems to be an environment where, we tried to get it done last year in Washington. It didn't happen, but I think there's something that's going to happen in this year or next that really could accelerate the kinds of projects we want to get done.
I'm going to use my privilege as a moderator to just share a couple of my own thoughts on this, because I do think that the current affordability crisis creates the opportunity to accelerate a lot of meaningful changes that are both deeply pro-climate and deeply pro-consumer. And I'm really excited about the prospect of the affordability bill taking shape and the things that we could put in it. Small things like automating permitting for residential solar and storage, disallowing utilities to use ratepayer funds to lobby, banning competitive suppliers, removing the remuneration kickback to utilities for offshore wind. And then some of the bigger stuff, right? Like changing gas policy, redefining the obligation to serve, expanding the deployment of non-pipe alternatives, eliminating the gas line extension, the money for gas line extensions, deploying rates for heat pumps. Like, there's so much we can do today that would help ease the burden of electric rates for consumers across the Commonwealth today and in the years to come. So silver lining is that things are really expensive, and that creates a lot of political pressure to maybe get it right. All right, oh my gosh, we're back in the elevator. Ding. Now we're with George, and it's 6 months from now, and he's like, God, I am just looking for a great headline. We've made a lot of success, made a lot of progress. What's a headline that you'd love to see in State House News Service in the fall of 2025?
This one's easy. SouthCoast Wind takes final investment decision, moves into construction.
I like that one. Interconnection delays are cut in half. Massachusetts leads in the nation in solar and storage deployment.
JERA leads the way on reutilizing energy infrastructure to bring down power costs and accelerate the energy transition.
All right. And well, keep State House News open on your browser, and maybe we'll be seeing those headlines. But let's turn to the audience here. What's on your mind? Dan Dolan.
Hi, folks. Dan Dolan, New England Power Generators. Thank you for the conversation. And maybe continuing the more positive theme here on the silver linings. And Randy, you touched a little bit on federal permitting reform, piggybacking on what happened here last year. I'm curious where you all see other potential opportunities in which, for better or worse, we've got 3.5+ years in front of us. Where are the opportunities to try and work with the administration? I hear things about solar, where it seems like that is having some level of a moment at the federal level. Nuclear has clearly been one of those areas. Hydrogen has the potential. Curious how you all are thinking about that.
I'll speak generally. Dan, good to see you. In any one of those sectors as others, when we can make the connection to bring them back or enhance in manufacturing in the United States, jobs, the economy. We're hearing from members, we're having these conversations, and let's just say, red congressional districts, red states, whatever, that is impactful, as I mentioned earlier. That moves the dial, and there seems to be, even in this administration, a recognition of that, whatever they want to call the clean energy transition or climate in their minds, maybe they won't call it climate economy. So in those parameters, there's plenty of opportunity, but it's connecting all these things back to tangible, positive economic outlook. The U.S., I think that resonates. So I'll just answer that broadly.
The South Coast Wind federal permitting process took 4 years, which is perhaps several years longer than was originally anticipated, and I think we can do better.
I think on climate tech, this administration, particularly the Secretary of Energy, really, really likes advanced technology. And so I think that's a real opportunity for Massachusetts as well to find partnership across a range of different technologies.
And I'll just add, I think long-range transmission planning regionally and super regionally is a huge opportunity for us. I mean, many of you saw the ISO study about just how much more efficient and cost-effective it would be if we rationalize the points of interconnect for offshore wind. So we can do a lot, again, that's pro-consumer and pro-climate when we think about the grid and the transmission we need to build. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really like the recommendation that you said at the end. Thank you, George. And it's quite an insightful conversation. I was so honored to serve on the City Council with Mayor Joe. I like your energy. I want to say never change. You bring so much to the table. I guess
that was one vote I had, by the way.
As a municipal official, I will continue to push my colleagues so we can explore tools like zoning, incentives, and municipal aggregation so that we can actually have an equitable energy access. But I guess today, when I listen to your conversation, what is missing is I'm curious to know with the regulation for this current Trump-era regulatory landscape, how has that impacted investor confidence in clean energy projects?
Yeah, Becky, do you want to take that?
Yes. No. It's hard to overstate how impactful the Trump administration has been on investor confidence in offshore wind. I think that's just something that makes sense. I think our challenge is to bring our investors along with us by demonstrating what our path is. What is a path to success, and how reasonable is that, and to continue to update that and provide them with the information. Because if we don't do that, then they're reading the newspaper, they're watching the market, and it is not a rosy picture. So I'll flip your question and just say that it is our job to paint a path forward for investors through what is otherwise a pretty dark time.
If I can add, thanks, Will, good to see you. To add to that, I mean, we know investment is based on, we'll monetize risk, which is driven by predictability or lack thereof or clarity. The rhetorical power of the president is one of the most powerful tools any president has. Tariffs have compounded that. And I sat here the last time, a couple of months ago, with the head of the Massachusetts Republican Party, and her response was like, well, that's just the way he negotiates. That is reckless, because that creates uncertainty. And I know now there's a tariff war against our great geopolitical adversary in Canada. That causes big problems across the spectrum. So we're seeing from our membership, people are holding back money. What happens next? Until there's clarity, we're going to there's uncertainty, and that risk goes up, and that costs more, and that's affecting investment across the spectrum.
Yeah, uncertainty is the enemy of investment. It's harder to understand if a project pencils out or not. And so a lot of my job is sort of trying to inform our development teams about what's happening in Washington. And we're changing the nature of how we write contracts because of that, particularly on the procurement side. However, JERA remains bullish on the United States, remains bullish on U.S. energy and U.S. innovation. And you'll watch this space. over the next several months about potential investments in the United States and including in New England and in Massachusetts.
Hi, my name is Karen Kraut. I'm with Mothers Out Front and Gas Transition Allies. I think we all are aware that the impact of exorbitant energy bills, customer bills, is going to be one of the greatest threats to our progress in the state if people are furious about their bills. And the elephant in the room for affordability is that investor-owned utilities are incentivized to invest in highly profitable, large-scale capital projects. So with that in mind, I'm wondering who in the legislature or in the administration is examining current utility incentives and what kind of comprehensive restructuring of these incentives can we expect this year to better align them with customer, their interests and society's interests and the interests of the planet.
Jamie, Chair Van Nostrand, do you want to? Well, I think it's a great question. I mean, the utility business models are not perfectly aligned for affordability or climate. They're pretty well aligned for shareholder profit, and that's a problem. Luckily, we have some of the brightest minds in the nation thinking about this, Chairman, and your team. And I think this affordability crisis creates some opportunities, and back to the silver linings, to be looking fresh at, what are these utility ROE expectations that the utilities feel entitled to, for example. When you look at the drivers of these costs, I mean, it really is the price of natural gas that both sets the cost on the margin and it is driving so much of the affordability crisis that we have today. So I'm hopeful that this moment creates an opportunity to take bigger, bolder steps away from our dependence on natural gas. I'm curious if any other...
Yeah, thank you. I'm a big fan. Thank you for all the work, what we did in Somerville, Climate Forward, and our planning there. Mothers Out Front was a big part, an incredible partner. Thank you very much for that. But we hear, obviously, the word affordability a lot, and it's exciting and refreshing to hear. Not surprised that the administration is leading. Looking forward to with the work there in the legislature doing the affordability bill that will come out and commenting on that. But we need to remind people, we need to be clear, clean energy is not the problem. It is the solution moving forward. So in addition to considering some of the things you mentioned, and I do, for full disclosure, utilities are part of my organization. They don't run the policy, but we do need them at the table, part of the solution. And I'll just, on that point alone, where we make a mistake, and I often tell the utility companies, you should be calling out where we, and I'm a former policymaker, have not set the regulatory or policy framework for you to reduce costs. But also, when we're talking about investments, some of this should be considered public infrastructure. If we're going to have them carry the costs, we're going to be paying it on our bills as well. So we need to think of that more as a more complex problem to simplify. But if I can make one recommendation to the legislature on the affordability package being considered, is to create a clean energy fast track for consumers. And that means simplifying access to rooftop solar and home batteries and heat pumps and EV charging, and sort of with an integrated permitting and financing to focus on low and moderate income residents, but as well as many others you're suggesting. So just want to make that comment.
Yeah, the building decarbonization clearinghouse idea is an exciting one.
Yep.
Let me just answer adjacent to that question, coming back to my main theme about surplus interconnection service. If surplus interconnection service was allowed for clean energy procurements, we're not saying it needs to be required. It won't work for every project, but if it's allowed, it just means there's less need for new infrastructure. And so that's a way of bringing the costs down, not on gas, but on electricity.
Yeah, and kudos to those in this room that are involved in some of the long-range energy planning work that's happening across Massachusetts.
Hi. Steve Cowell, Northeast Energy Efficiency and Electrification Council. I have two difficult questions. Well, first, Kitty Dukakis. Thoughts are with her. Secondly, here are the difficult ones. One is, how do we do a multi-state collaboration? First, obviously, with other New England blue states, but how do we reach out across the border to red states and find common strategy? The second little piece is, we just did a study. Massachusetts spends $14.5 billion per year on fossil fuels. Check that box off. That ain't easy. How do we really transition that big a difference to clean energy, and how do we work to make sure that works for all the people who are in that industry? So 2 difficult questions: collaboration across states and transition. So, sorry guys. Massachusetts is doing some fantastic stuff, and you all did a great job of discussing that, but keep going, and quick thoughts on those 2 big difficult issues.
Go for it. We share a regional grid, don't we?
Yeah, I'll start in the first one with how do we create connections to outside of New England and in particular to red states, and for us that's through the supply chain. We're working really hard to look forward in the South Coast wind procurement process. We're not quite to the point in time in which we have all of our contracts laid out, but we are doing the work now to be prospective and figure out how can we create connections to red states so that they benefit from this project in the same way that New England will. In particular, we're looking at SOVs out of Louisiana, which has a great shipyard and a company that's very focused on the offshore economy and also it's politically active. So that's a great fit for us. But it's things like that that I think will help share interest in this project, in particular when it comes to the tax credit fight that's coming up.
Yeah. I'll just say, it's pointing out what is factual right now. The IRA, again, which frustrates me about this last campaign, on manufacturing alone, red congressional districts saw 80% of the economic benefit, $10 billion. $10 billion, which is no mistake why congressional leaders like, oh, let's not take a sledgehammer to the IRA. In Louisiana, on the Gulf Coast Wind Project, RWE, the legislators, Republican and Democratic legislators in the state of Louisiana moved for rapid permitting approvals for offshore wind because they saw the reciprocal benefits to shipbuilding and metal fabrication and job creation. So in all these instances and examples, it's economic impact. And I go back to what I mentioned earlier, it's really bringing it down to a human level message about we're going to create manufacturing, great paying jobs, improve your lives, and energy security. And I think that message resonates and it moves legislative action. I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
I just want to agree with you, Joe. We have a solar farm down in Louisiana, and it was a red district. It's now redistricting. It's a blue district, but a very red part of that district. And the economic development, the tax base, it's not a question about climate. It's about needing more power and this being a great opportunity. And so I think that's a key message for all of us.
And I'll just have a quick word of gratitude. I think there's a tremendous amount of regional collaboration that is already happening. I see Wheezy, Nora nodding in the audience, but the New England Attorney Generals and their staff, some of whom are here, talk to each other. Boston is hosting the National Conference of State Legislatures this summer. The New England governors and Eastern Canadian premiers talk to each other. So just keep it up. It's a really important part of how we make progress. All right, who wants the last word? We've got one more question. All right.
Hey guys, Manny Semi from Argus. You guys had mentioned challenges involving stopping these disinformation campaigns and just ensuring people hear about our climate goals, the programs, policies, and efforts in place towards achieving those goals. I would like to ask how you guys are currently approaching that, because we're all aware that these disinformation groups are funded by deep pockets. I mean, if your funded source's net worth is higher than the combined GDP of several countries, you know we have a problem. So how are you guys currently approaching tackling these disinformation campaigns?
So thanks for that. And before you go, I'd love to talk to you, introduce you to our head of strategic communications, Natasha Perez. We launched the Powering Tomorrow campaign. If you go to our website, www.joinact.org, Powering Tomorrow, am I right? But we'll get you that. And you know, it's going to be not only what we're doing as an organization. We've had this conversation with another organization. It's aligning partners and allies in this to be able to rapidly deploy what has been confirmed in research data information, democratize that information and put it into people's hands. We're getting crushed on this, and there's been a concerted effort on the other side to undermine us, and we're losing right now. We are losing, and if we don't flip that script, we're going to lose in the long term. So happy to talk about that because we are going to be, it will be a campaign. We plan to bring that into the midterms and other elections because That's the only way we're going to win.
I'll be open to having that conversation afterwards.
All right, well, I want to be respectful of folks' time. I know the panel's happy to hang out if folks have questions. There's plenty of coffee and more pastries in the hallway if you'd like to continue your conversations informally. But big thanks again to State House News and to our fabulous panel.